The town wanted her gone. The law said she had nothing, and the man who promised forever had already disappeared into the smoke of another woman's bed. Eleanor Hayes didn't know that stepping off that stagecoach would mean choosing between two kinds of death: the slow rot of judgment in a town that saw her swollen belly as proof of sin, or the fast freeze of a Wyoming winter with nowhere to go. What she couldn't have known was that a silent stranger watching from the livery shadows would offer her something worse than both: a chance. And in 1887, a chance for a woman like her meant walking straight into the fire. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Eleanor Hayes felt her daughter kick hard against her ribs, as if the child already knew what was waiting outside. Through the dust-caked window, she could see them gathering. Not a welcoming committee, a jury. Women in high collars with faces like shuttered windows. Men whose eyes moved from her face to her belly and stayed there, doing their calculations. Even the children stopped their games to stare, learning early how to spot the damned. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter, though it did nothing to hide what 7 months of pregnancy had made obvious. Her hands were shaking. She hated that they were shaking. The driver yanked open the door, his weathered face carefully blank. "Cedar Ridge, ma'am. End of the line." She'd paid for passage to Cheyenne. This wasn't Cheyenne. "There's been a mistake," she said, hearing how thin her voice sounded. "I have a ticket to—" "No mistake." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Town council paid your fare this far. Said this is where you get off." Understanding hit her like a fist to the stomach. Thomas. Her husband, former husband, as of 3 weeks ago when Judge Morrison signed the papers, had made sure she'd have no refuge in Cheyenne, no anonymity in a city large enough to disappear into. He'd bought her a ticket to nowhere and made sure nowhere knew exactly what she was. A scarlet woman, a cautionary tale, a problem someone else would have to solve. "I see." Eleanor gripped the door frame and hauled herself upright, her back screaming in protest. "My trunk?" "Ain't no trunk, ma'am. Just this." He held up a carpet bag that looked even more pathetic than she felt. Everything she owned, everything Thomas hadn't claimed or burned or given to the woman who'd replaced her in their bed before Eleanor's side had gone cold. She took the bag, stepped down into the dirt street of Cedar Ridge, Wyoming, population maybe 200 if you counted the dogs. The watching crowd didn't part, didn't move, just stared with that particular brand of righteous curiosity that made her skin crawl. A woman in a dove-gray dress stepped forward, her face pinched with the kind of virtue that curdles into cruelty. "We don't have a place for your kind here." "I'm not asking for charity," Eleanor said, lifting her chin. "I can work. I can—" "Work?" The woman's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "Doing what, exactly? Corrupting our husbands? Teaching our daughters that sin has no consequences?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I was a married woman until 3 weeks ago. My husband divorced you for adultery. We received the telegram." The woman's smile was a blade. "Don't bother lying. Thomas Hayes is a respected businessman in Cheyenne, a deacon. He wouldn't have cast you out without cause." The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Eleanor pressed a hand to her side. The irony burned worse than the shame. Thomas had been the adulterer. She'd walked in on him with the banker's daughter, both of them too drunk to bother with the pretense of clothes. But he'd had money, connections, a lawyer who knew which judge to file with, and Eleanor had been too shocked, too broken, to fight back until it was too late. "I need a room," she said quietly. "Just for tonight. I'll move on in the morning." "The boarding house is full." This from a man in a sheriff's badge, his hand resting easy on his gun belt. Not a threat, just a reminder of who had the power here. Eleanor looked past him to the 2-story building with a sign reading "Rooms" in faded paint. Through the window, she could see empty chairs in the parlor. Empty. "I have money," she tried. "Ain't about money." The sheriff's voice wasn't unkind, which somehow made it worse. "It's about order. You understand?" She understood perfectly. She was chaos. Proof that the world wasn't fair, that good wives could be thrown away, that men lied and women suffered, and there was no justice in any of it. They didn't want her here because she reminded them how fragile their own safety was. "Then I'll sleep in the livery," Eleanor said. "I'll be gone by dawn." "Livery's private property," the gray-dressed woman again, her voice triumphant. "Owner has a right to refuse service." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. That had broken weeks ago. This was something deeper. The foundation of her belief that people were fundamentally decent, that someone, somewhere would help. "What do you want from me?" The words came out raw. "You want me to disappear? I'm trying. You want me to apologize for what? Being the one who got thrown away?" Silence. The kind that pressed down like a physical weight. Then a child's voice, bright with the casual cruelty of innocence. "Mama, why is that lady crying?" Eleanor touched her face, wet. She hadn't even felt the tears start. "Come along, Sarah." A woman pulled the child close. "Don't stare, it's rude." They were dispersing now, the show over. Eleanor Hayes had been judged, sentenced, and dismissed. In 5 minutes, she'd cease to be a person and become a story they'd tell. A warning. Remember that woman who came through? That's what happens when you forget your place. The stagecoach pulled away, the driver not looking back. Eleanor stood in the center of the street, her carpetbag at her feet, her body aching, her daughter rolling and kicking inside her like she was already trying to fight her way out of this mess. The sun was setting. Late September in Wyoming meant cold nights. She had a wool shawl and a dress that didn't fit right anymore, and $17 in her pocket. She didn't have a plan, didn't have hope. What she had was a baby coming in 2 months and a body that was already exhausted. The smart thing would be to walk, pick a direction and move until she found somewhere that didn't know her name. But her feet hurt, her back was on fire, and there was a bench outside the general store that looked like it might hold her weight. She made it 3 steps before her vision grayed at the edges. Not now. She locked her knees, forced herself to breathe. Not here, not in front of them. "You planning to pass out in the street, or you got somewhere to be?" The voice came from her left. Male, low, with an edge that suggested he didn't particularly care about the answer, but was asking anyway. Eleanor turned her head, slowly, trying not to jar anything loose. He stood in the shadow of the livery stable, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat pulled low enough that she couldn't see much of his face. What she could see wasn't reassuring. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pale against sun-weathered skin. His clothes were work-worn, his boots scuffed, and he held himself with the kind of stillness that came from being comfortable with violence. "I'll manage," she said, because pride was all she had left. "Don't look like it." He moved forward, not quite into the light. "You got a name? Does it matter?" "Might." He tilted his head, studying her the way someone might study a horse they were thinking about buying. "You the woman they threw off the stage?" "Apparently." "Where are you headed?" Eleanor laughed, and it came out bitter. "Excellent question. If you figure it out, let me know." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You any good at cooking?" She blinked. "What?" "Cooking. You know how to do it?" Yes, I can cook." "Can you clean? Handle ranch work? Deal with men who ain't seen soap in a month and got the manners to match?" Eleanor stared at him, trying to understand what was happening. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a roof and 3 meals. You work for it. That's the deal." "I don't even know your name." "Caleb Rourke. I run cattle 20 miles northeast of here. Got a crew of 8 who've been eating their own cooking since my last housekeeper quit. They're about ready to kill each other." "Why did she quit?" "Got married, moved to Laramie." His tone suggested that was the end of the story. Eleanor's mind was racing. This could be a trick. Could be something worse than a trick. She knew nothing about this man except that he had a scar and a reputation that made him comfortable approaching a desperate woman in a hostile town. "What's the catch?" she asked. "Catch?" "You're offering work to a woman who's very obviously pregnant and just got divorced for alleged adultery. Either you're a saint or you're after something, and you don't look like a saint." The corner of his mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. "I need someone who can cook and won't run off at the first sign of winter." "You need somewhere to be that ain't here. Seems like a fair trade." "What about when the baby comes?" What about it? I'll be useless for weeks, maybe longer. Caleb shrugged. We'll manage. We're not delicate. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. It was the first offer
This
of
story
basic
was
human
posted on the
decency
channel
she'd
west
received
of
in 3
Betrayal.
weeks,
Please
and
do
it
not
terrified her.
repost it in any form.
I don't have references, she said. Don't care about references. Can you do the work or not? Yes. Then that's all I need to know. He picked up her carpet bag like it weighed nothing. We leave now. It's a 4-hour ride. Now? Eleanor looked at the darkening sky. In the dark? You want to spend the night here? Be my guest. I'm sure they'll warm right up to you. He had a point. Eleanor looked back at the town, the shuttered windows, the empty street, the bench she'd been aiming for. Nothing here but judgment and cold. She looked at Caleb Rourke, this scarred stranger who might be rescuing her, or might be making the worst mistake of her life. All right, she said. Let's go. He nodded once and turned toward the stable. Eleanor followed, her hand pressed to her belly, feeling her daughter shift and settle. This is insane, she thought, following a strange man into the middle of nowhere. You could end up dead in a ditch. But the alternative was freezing to death in Cedar Ridge, and at least this way there was a chance. She'd take a chance over certainty any day. The wagon was old but sturdy, the horse even older but steady. Caleb didn't talk as he helped her up. His hands impersonal, efficient, and Eleanor was grateful. She didn't have the energy for conversation. They rolled out of Cedar Ridge as the last light bled from the sky. Eleanor looked back once, saw curtains twitching, saw shadows behind windows, the whole town watching her leave with a strange man, already writing the ending to her story. She turned forward and didn't look back again. The road was rough, barely more than wagon ruts through scrub grass and rock. The temperature dropped fast and Eleanor pulled her shawl tight, wishing she had something heavier. Caleb noticed. There's a blanket behind the seat. She found it, thick wool, smelling of horse and dust, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Better. They rode in silence for an hour. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the steady clop of hooves, and the wind picking up across the plains. Eleanor tried to stay awake, tried to watch the landscape for landmarks, but exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide. Her head nodded forward, jerked back. You can sleep, Caleb said. We got a ways yet. I shouldn't. Why not? Good question. Because she didn't trust him? Because she needed to stay alert in case this turned bad? Because letting her guard down felt like surrender? I'm fine, she said. Suit yourself. Another 20 minutes passed. The stars came out, sharp and cold in a sky so big it made her feel like nothing. Back in Philadelphia, where she'd grown up, the sky had been small, hemmed in by buildings and smoke. Out here, there was nothing between her and the infinite. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like drowning. You running from something? Caleb's voice cut through the dark. Eleanor stiffened. You said no questions. I said no questions asked. Didn't say I wouldn't be curious. Does it matter? Might. She studied his profile. What she could see of it in the starlight. Hard angles. The scar catching shadow. What do you think? I think you got the look of someone who's had the ground pulled out from under them. Seen it before. In a mirror? He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something that might have been amusement. Something like that. Eleanor pulled the blanket tighter. My husband decided he preferred someone else. The divorce went through. He had friends in the right places. I didn't. That's the whole story. That why you're carrying? Heat flooded her face. The baby is his. Not that it matters now. Matters to you. She's all that matters. Eleanor's hand moved to her belly. Everything else is just noise. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, she? I don't know, not really, but it feels like a she. You got a name picked out? Not yet. Seemed like bad luck to name her before. Eleanor stopped. Before I knew if we'd survive this. Before I knew if I'd be able to keep her. Before everything fell apart. Before you knew where you'd land, Caleb finished. Something like that. They crested a rise, and the land opened up below them, a valley of sorts, dark and vast, with a line of cottonwoods marking where a creek must run. In the distance, Eleanor could see a faint glow. lamplight. "That's home," Caleb said. Home. The word felt foreign. Eleanor had grown up in a narrow brick house with her mother and two sisters, had married Thomas and moved into his house, which never felt like hers, had been thrown out and spent 3 weeks in a boarding house that smelled like cabbage and defeat. She didn't know what home was supposed to feel like anymore. The road sloped down, and the wagon picked up speed. Eleanor gripped the seat, her back protesting every bump. As they got closer, she could make out the shape of buildings. A main house, low and sprawling. A barn, corrals. What might have been a bunkhouse. "That's the crew quarters," Caleb said, following her gaze. "You'll be in the main house. There's a room off the kitchen. Small, but it's got a stove." "Where do you sleep?" "Other end of the house." Eleanor heard what he wasn't saying. "You'll have privacy. You'll be safe. I'm not that kind of man." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. The wagon rolled into the yard, and immediately dogs started barking. Big dogs from the sound of it. "They're loud, but they won't bite unless I tell them to," Caleb said. He pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down, then came around to help Eleanor. She tried to manage on her own, pride again, but her legs had gone numb from sitting, and she stumbled. Caleb caught her, his grip firm, and for a moment they stood too close. He smelled like leather and smoke and something else she couldn't name. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. "Easy," he said. "You're steady." "I'm steady." He released her and grabbed her bag. "Come on, I'll show you the room." The front door opened before they reached it, spilling yellow light into the yard. A man stepped out, shorter than Caleb, wiry, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old wood. "Boss, didn't expect you back tonight." His eyes found Eleanor, and she saw the surprise. Then the assessment. "You brought company." "This is Eleanor Hayes. She's the new housekeeper." "Eleanor, this is Mac. He's been here longer than the dirt." Mac's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. "That'd make me ancient." "Welcome, ma'am. Can't say the place is much, but it's warm." "Warm sounds good right now," Eleanor said. "Where's the crew?" Caleb asked. "Bunkhouse. Probably playing cards and arguing about who cheated last. You want me to tell them?" "Morning's soon enough. Let's get Mrs. Hayes settled." Inside, the house was exactly what Eleanor expected. Functional, sparse, and desperately in need of a woman's touch. The main room held a table, chairs, and a stone fireplace. Doors led off in 3 directions. Caleb led her through a door to the right, past a kitchen that made her wince. Dirty dishes stacked everywhere, a pot on the stove with something crusty burned to the bottom, to a small room in the back. It held a bed, a dresser, and a pot-bellied stove that was already burning low. "Mac must have lit it when he heard us coming," Caleb said. "There's linens in the dresser, wash basins in the kitchen. Outhouse is out back, but there's a chamber pot under the bed if you need it at night." Eleanor looked around the room. It was small, plain, and it was hers. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. Caleb set her bag on the bed. "Kitchen's a mess. Don't worry about it tonight. We'll start fresh in the morning." "What time?" "Crew eats at 5. But you don't have to." "5 is fine." He studied her for a moment, and Eleanor had the sense he was recalculating something. "You sure you're up for this?" "Mr. Rourke, I'm 7 months pregnant, divorced, broke, and just got run out of town by a mob with manners. Cooking breakfast for 8 cowboys is the least of my problems." That almost smile again. "Caleb, nobody calls me Mr. Rourke." "Caleb, then." He nodded. "Get some sleep. You look like you need it." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Eleanor stood in the middle of the room, listening to his footsteps fade, listening to the wind outside and the crackle of the stove and the settling sounds of an unfamiliar house. Her daughter kicked, hard enough that Eleanor gasped. "I know," she whispered, pressing both hands to her belly. "I know. But we're here. We're somewhere. That's better than nowhere." She sank onto the bed. The mattress was lumpy but clean, and let herself feel the full weight of the day. She'd been rejected, humiliated, judged by a town full of strangers, and then a scarred man with a reputation had offered her a job, no questions asked. Eleanor didn't know if Caleb Rourke was her salvation or just another chapter in a story that kept getting worse. But tonight, she had a roof, a bed, a stove.
This story was posted
Tomorrow,
on the channel
she'd figure
west
out the
of
rest.
Betrayal.
She pulled
Please
off
do
her
not
boots,
repost
wrapped
it
herself
in
in
any
the
form.
blanket from the wagon. She'd return it in the morning and lay down. Sleep took her fast, dragging her under before she could worry about what came next. Eleanor woke to darkness and the sound of men's voices. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was wrong. The smells were wrong. Everything was wrong. Then memory crashed back. The stagecoach. The town. Caleb. She sat up, wincing as her back protested. Through the thin walls, she could hear movement in the kitchen. Deep voices. Laughter. A glance at the window showed pre-dawn gray. She'd slept hard, dreamless, which was a mercy. Eleanor stood, straightened her dress as best she could, and splashed water from the basin on her face. She looked like hell. Hair coming loose from its pins, dress wrinkled, dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. Nothing to be done about it. She opened the door and stepped into the kitchen. 6 men stood around the room in various states of wakefulness. They all turned to stare when she appeared. Eleanor lifted her chin. "Good morning. I'm Eleanor Hayes, your new housekeeper. Who wants coffee?" Silence. Then one of the younger ones, couldn't have been more than 20, grinned. "I'll take 3 cups, ma'am." "You'll take one and be grateful," Eleanor said. "Where's the coffee?" The kid pointed to a shelf. "Up there. But the pot's kind of disgusting. I can see that." Eleanor rolled up her sleeves. "All of you, out. I can't work with you underfoot." "But ma'am, we usually eat in here." "I know. New rule. Breakfast gets served when it's ready. You'll hear the bell." They looked at each other, then at the doorway where Caleb had just appeared. He took in the scene, Eleanor squaring off against his crew, all of them uncertain, and nodded. "You heard her. Out." They filed out like scolded children, Mac bringing up the rear with a look that might have been respect. When they were gone, Caleb lingered. "You didn't have to start today." "Yes, I did." Eleanor was already filling the coffee pot with water from the pump. "Where do you keep the eggs?" "Cold cellar. Out back under the trap door, but I'll find it." "How many am I feeding?" 8, counting me and Mac." "Dietary restrictions? Allergies?" Caleb blinked. "What?" "Never mind." Eleanor waved him off. "Go. I'll call you when it's ready." He left, shaking his head. Eleanor stood in the middle of the disaster that was the kitchen and took stock. Dirty dishes everywhere, counters crusted with old food. The stove was decent, but the pots were a nightmare. She'd worked in worse. Her mother had run a boarding house in Philadelphia. Eleanor had learned to cook for 20 before she'd turned 12. She started with the coffee. That was easy. Got it brewing while she cleared space on the counter. Found the cold cellar, which was better stocked than she'd expected. Eggs, bacon, potatoes, butter, milk. She could work with this. An hour later, the kitchen was transformed. Not clean, that would take days, but functional. And the smell of bacon and fresh biscuits filled the air. Eleanor rang the bell Caleb had pointed out. They came fast, filing in and stopping short when they saw the table. She'd set it properly. Plates, forks, knives, coffee cups, serving platters of scrambled eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and biscuits with butter and jam she'd found in the pantry. "Jesus," someone whispered. "Sit," Eleanor said, "before it gets cold." They sat, started eating, and for a few minutes the only sound was the clatter of forks and appreciative chewing. Then Mac looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Ma'am, this is the best meal I've had in 6 months. It's just breakfast. Ain't nothing just about it." The young kid, she'd learned his name was Davy, was already reaching for seconds. "You cook like this all the time." "Only when I'm properly motivated." "What motivates you?" This from another man, older, with a scar across his knuckles. Eleanor met his eyes. "Not freezing to death, not starving, keeping a roof over my head, the usual things." Caleb, sitting at the head of the table, watched her with an expression she couldn't read. "You'll want to know the routine," he said. "Breakfast at 5, lunch at noon. We'll come in if we're close, otherwise pack it. Dinner at 6. Anything else you need, tell Mac. He handles supplies." Eleanor nodded. "I'll need a full inventory of the pantry, and that kitchen needs a deep clean before I can work properly." "Do what you need to do." "I will." The meal continued, and slowly, very slowly, the men started to relax around her, asked careful questions. Where was she from? How long had she been cooking? Did she know how to make pie? Eleanor answered what she felt like answering and deflected the rest. They were good men, she thought. Rough, but not mean. They looked at her belly and didn't comment. Looked at her hand, ringless now. She'd sold her wedding band 2 weeks ago and didn't ask. By the time they filed out, she'd learned their names: Mac, Davy, Cole, Jim, Hank, Pete, Samuel, and Caleb. 8 men who'd been living like bachelors and were pathetically grateful for a decent meal. Eleanor could work with that. She spent the rest of the morning cleaning, washed every dish, scrubbed every surface, organized the pantry until it made sense. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, and she had to stop twice to catch her breath. But by noon, the kitchen was hers. Lunch was simple: sandwiches and leftover biscuits. The men who came in ate quickly and left without fuss. Eleanor kept working. Found mouse droppings in the pantry, set traps. Found a leak under the sink, stuffed a rag in it, and made a note to tell Mac. Found her rhythm in the work, and for the first time in weeks felt something like purpose. She was elbow deep in bread dough when Caleb came in. "You're supposed to be resting." Eleanor didn't look up. "I'm supposed to be working." That was the deal. Deal didn't include you running yourself into the ground on day 1. "I'm fine." "You look exhausted." "I'm pregnant, not dying." She punched the dough harder than necessary. "Is there something you need, or are you just here to criticize?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "Crew says you're doing a good job." They're easily impressed. They've had 6 months of burned beans and raw bacon. You could serve them dirt and they'd be impressed. He paused. "But you didn't serve them dirt. You gave them a real meal. That means something." Eleanor stopped kneading and looked at him. Really looked. He was watching her with that same unreadable expression, and she realized he was trying to figure her out. Good luck with that. She didn't even understand herself anymore. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "Yesterday, in town. You didn't know me. Didn't owe me anything, so why?" Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "You ever see someone standing on the edge of something and know that if you don't reach out right then, they're gone?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "Yes." "Then you know why." They looked at each other across the kitchen, 2 people who'd ended up here by different roads but with the same understanding. The world was hard, and sometimes all you could do was keep someone else from falling. "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly. Caleb nodded. "Finish your bread. And for Christ's sake, sit down before you fall down." He left before she could argue. Eleanor stared after him, then looked down at the dough in her hands. She didn't know what she'd expected from Caleb Rourke. Pity, maybe, or judgment disguised as kindness. What she hadn't expected was someone who understood. She shaped the dough into loaves, set them to rise, and finally, sat down. Her daughter rolled and kicked, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this. "We're going to be okay," Eleanor whispered. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to make it." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Winter was coming. But for now, for today, Eleanor Hayes had a kitchen, a job, and a future that looked slightly less impossible than it had 24 hours ago. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The first week passed in a blur of work that left Eleanor so exhausted she'd fall asleep still wearing her boots. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the pre-dawn stirring of men preparing for a day that would break their backs, the midday quiet when the land itself seemed to hold its breath, the evening return when dirt and sweat walked through the door, looking for hot food and maybe a kind word. She gave them the food. The kind words came harder. The crew kept their distance at first, speaking to her in careful voices, watching her like she might shatter if they said the wrong thing. Eleanor hated it. She'd rather have their honesty than their pity. It was Cole who broke the ice, accidentally, on her 5th morning. He walked into the kitchen before dawn, half asleep, and nearly collided with her at the stove. "Christ, woman, you're everywhere," he muttered, then froze, realizing what he'd said. "I mean, ma'am, I'm sorry, I am everywhere," Eleanor said, flipping bacon with more force than necessary. "Because this kitchen was a disaster, and someone had to fix it. You have a problem with that?" Cole blinked, then grinned. "No, ma'am. No problem at all. After that, they started treating her like a person instead of a porcelain doll.
This
They
story was
complained about the
posted on the
coffee being
channel
too
west
strong,
of Betrayal.
argued about whether
Please
her
do not
biscuits were
repost
better
it
than the
in any
last
form.
housekeepers, tracked mud across her clean floor, and sheepishly cleaned it up when she glared at them. It felt almost normal, almost like belonging. Caleb remained distant, polite, appearing for meals and vanishing back into the work of running a cattle operation that seemed to demand every hour he had. Sometimes Eleanor would see him through the kitchen window, working alongside his men, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cooling weather. He moved like someone who'd forgotten how to rest. She understood that. Rest felt dangerous. Like if you stopped moving, everything you were running from would catch up. On the 10th day, Hank caught his hand in a fence wire and came to the kitchen bleeding through a makeshift bandage that was already soaked red. "It's nothing," he said, his face gray. "Just need to wrap it proper." Eleanor took one look at the gash across his palm and pointed to a chair. "Sit." "Ma'am, I don't want to trouble." "Sit down before you pass out and crack your skull on my clean floor." He sat. Eleanor had Davy heat water while she found clean cloth and the bottle of whiskey she'd seen in the pantry. Her mother had taught her basic wound care. You didn't run a boarding house without learning how to handle the stupid things men did to themselves. "This is going to hurt," she said, pouring whiskey over the wound. Hank's jaw clenched, but he didn't make a sound. "Good man." She cleaned the cut, which was deep but not as bad as the blood had suggested, and wrapped it tight. "Keep it dry. Change the bandage twice a day. If it starts to smell or you get a fever, you tell me immediately." "Yes, ma'am." Hank flexed his hand, testing the binding. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just don't be stupid with it." Word spread. By evening, the entire crew knew that Eleanor Hayes could stitch a man up and wasn't squeamish about blood. When Pete came in 2 days later with a burn from a branding iron, he went straight to her. "You're not a doctor," Caleb said, watching her wrap Pete's forearm. "No, but I'm what you've got." Eleanor tied off the bandage. "Unless you want to ride 4 hours to Cedar Ridge every time someone gets hurt." "Cedar Ridge has a doctor." "Has something that calls itself a doctor. Whether he's sober enough to help is another question." Caleb's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Fair point." She finished with Pete and sent him off with instructions he probably wouldn't follow. Men never did. "You've done this before," Caleb said. "My mother ran a boarding house. 20 rooms, always full, mostly with men who thought they were invincible." Eleanor started cleaning up the medical supplies she'd organized in a corner of the kitchen. "You learn fast or you watch them die of infected splinters. Your mother's still running that house?" "She's dead. Pneumonia, 3 years ago." Eleanor's voice was flat. She'd cried herself empty over that loss already. "My sister's got the house. I got married and moved to Cheyenne. And now you're here. And now I'm here." She met his eyes. "You regretting your offer yet?" "No." He said it without hesitation. "You?" Eleanor thought about it, really thought about it. 10 days ago, she'd been standing in a hostile town with nowhere to go. Now she had a kitchen, a purpose, and men who depended on her. Her back ached constantly, her feet were swollen, and she was so tired she sometimes forgot what day it was. But she wasn't alone. "No," she said. "I'm not." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. "Good." He left, and Eleanor went back to preparing dinner, feeling the baby kick against her ribs like she was weighing in on the conversation. The weather turned colder. October brought frost in the mornings and wind that cut through the valley like a knife. The crew started coming in with red faces and hands that shook from cold, and Eleanor made sure there was always hot coffee and something warm waiting. She learned their stories in fragments. Mac had been with Caleb for 15 years, since before the ranch existed in its current form. Davy was running from a father who used his fists more than his words. Cole had been a soldier and didn't talk about the war. Jim and Samuel were brothers who'd lost their farm in Kansas and drifted west looking for work. They didn't ask about her story, and she was grateful. What was there to say? "I married the wrong man and paid for it" seemed too simple. "I believed in promises that turned out to be lies" felt too raw. So she kept quiet and let her cooking speak for her. The night everything changed started ordinary enough. Dinner was beef stew and cornbread. The crew was loud and hungry. and Eleanor was counting down the minutes until she could sit down. She was ladling stew when the pain hit, not the baby, her back seizing so hard she gasped and nearly dropped the pot. "Ma'am?" Davy was on his feet. "You all right?" "Fine." Eleanor forced herself to breathe through it. "Just give me a minute." The pain eased slightly. She finished serving, waved off offers of help, and made it back to her room before her legs gave out. She sat on the bed, hands pressed to her lower back, and tried to think. This had been happening for days, sharp pains that came and went, leaving her breathless. She'd ignored them because there was work to do, and ignoring things was easier than facing them. But this was getting worse. A knock on the door. "Eleanor?" "Caleb." She hadn't heard him use her first name before. "I'm fine," she called. "Just tired." The door opened anyway. He stood in the doorway, filling the frame, his expression concerned. "You're not fine. You nearly collapsed out there." "I didn't collapse. I just—" Another wave of pain cut off her words. Caleb crossed the room in 3 steps and crouched in front of her. "How long has this been happening?" "It's nothing." "How long?" Eleanor wanted to lie, but the look in his eyes told her he'd see through it. "Few days, maybe a week." "Have you seen a doctor?" "There's no doctor within 20 miles, and the one in Cedar Ridge wouldn't see me if I paid him in gold." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Tomorrow, I'm taking you to Laramie." "That's a 2-day ride. You can't—" "Watch me." "Caleb." Eleanor grabbed his arm before he could stand. "I can't. If I leave, even for a few days, the crew can manage. They're grown men." "They're grown men who've been eating like kings because I'm here. You think they'll be grateful if I disappear?" She tried to laugh, but it came out strained. "Besides, this is probably normal. Women have babies all the time. And sometimes they die doing it." The words hung between them, brutal and true. Eleanor let go of his arm. "I'm not dying. You don't know that. I know I don't have a choice." She met his eyes. "I can't afford a doctor. Can't afford to lose this job. Can't afford to be weak." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to her dresser, and came back with the water basin. "Lie down." "What?" "Lie down. On your side." Eleanor hesitated, then did as he said, too tired to argue. She heard water pouring, heard him wringing out a cloth. "My mother used to get back pains when she was carrying my sister," Caleb said. His voice was different, softer, almost gentle. Heat helped. "This isn't ideal, but it's something." He pressed the warm cloth to her lower back, and Eleanor bit back a moan of relief. "Better?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. "Thank you." He didn't answer, just kept replacing the cloth with warm water, working in silence. The pain didn't disappear, but it dulled to something manageable. "You don't have to do this," Eleanor said after a while. "I know." "Then why are you?" Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because nobody did it for her." Eleanor opened her eyes. "Your mother?" "She died having my sister. There was a midwife, but she didn't know what she was doing. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Eleanor could hear the old grief underneath. "I was 10, old enough to remember, not old enough to help." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." He wrung out the cloth again. "But I'm not watching it happen again if I can help it." Eleanor felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, opening. "I'll be okay. The baby's not due for weeks. And if she comes early, then we'll manage. People have been having babies since the beginning of time. Most of them survive. Most isn't all." "No," Eleanor agreed, "but it's better than none." Caleb placed the cloth one more time, then stood. "Get some sleep. I'll tell the crew breakfast is at 6 tomorrow instead of 5. "You can't do that. They'll deal with it. You need rest more than they need to complain about being hungry." He left before she could argue, closing the door quietly behind him. Eleanor lay there, feeling the warmth seep into her aching muscles, feeling her daughter shift and settle inside her. She'd spent weeks believing she was completely alone in this. And maybe she was, in the ways that mattered. Caleb couldn't change the fact that she was divorced, disgraced, broke. He couldn't make the town accept her or her husband take her back. Not that she'd want him to. But he
This
could give her
story was
warm water
posted
and
on
an
the
extra
channel
hour of
west
sleep.
of Betrayal.
He could look at her like
Please
she
do
was a
not
person worth
repost it
saving.
in any form.
It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning, Eleanor woke to silence. No boot stomping, no men arguing, no coffee brewing. She sat up too fast, her back protesting, and grabbed for her shawl. Something was wrong. She hurried to the kitchen and found Caleb at the stove, frying eggs with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. "What are you doing?" He glanced up. "Making breakfast. What does it look like?" "It looks like you're making a mess." Eleanor surveyed the damage. Eggshells on the counter, bacon burned on one side and raw on the other, coffee boiling over. "Where's the crew?" "Told them to sleep in. We're starting late today." "You can't just—" Eleanor stopped. "You did this so I could rest. You needed it." She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt a surge of irritation. "I don't need you to take care of me." "Clearly, you do, since you won't do it yourself." Caleb flipped an egg, breaking the yolk. "Sit down. This is my kitchen, and you're going to get it back after you eat." He slid a plate in front of her, burned bacon, broken egg sauce, toast that was more charcoal than bread. "It's not pretty, but it's food." Eleanor looked at the plate, then at Caleb, then back at the plate, and despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the fear that never quite left, she laughed. It started as a chuckle and built into something bigger, something that shook her whole body and brought tears to her eyes. Caleb stared at her. "What's funny?" "This." Eleanor gestured at the disaster. "You, me, all of it. A month ago, I was a respectable married woman in Cheyenne. Now I'm eating burned bacon cooked by a cattle rancher who's trying to save my life. I wouldn't call this saving your life." "Close enough." Eleanor picked up a piece of bacon which crumbled in her fingers. "How did your last housekeeper survive 6 months of this?" "She cooked. I didn't." Caleb poured coffee that looked like mud. "But she also didn't work herself half to death." "I'm not—" "You are. I've watched you. Up before dawn, working until midnight, never sitting down unless you're forced to." He set the coffee in front of her. "You keep this up, you'll collapse before the baby comes." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the cup. "What else am I supposed to do? If I stop working, I'm useless. If I'm useless, you don't need me. That's not how this works." "That's exactly how it works." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "You hired me to cook and clean. If I can't do that, then you rest until you can." Caleb sat across from her. "You think I'm going to throw you out because you need a break?" "I think men change their minds when things get difficult." The words sat between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb's expression hardened. "I'm not your husband." "I know." "Do you?" He leaned forward. "Because it seems like you're waiting for me to prove you right. Waiting for me to turn into another Thomas Hayes." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You don't know anything about Thomas." "I know he threw away a good woman because it was easier than being a decent man. I know he left you with nothing and made sure nobody would help you." Caleb's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. "And I know I'm not him." "Then what are you?" The question came out before Eleanor could stop it. "What are you to me? Why are you helping? What do you want in return?" Caleb held her gaze. "Someone who keeps his word. That's all." It should have been reassuring. Instead, Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, and she looked away before he could see them. "Eat," Caleb said, his voice gentler. "Then go back to bed. The crew can handle cold sandwiches for lunch." "I'm not—" "Eleanor." He waited until she looked at him. "Please." She ate the terrible breakfast, went back to her room, lay down and tried to rest while her mind spun in circles. The problem was that she was starting to trust him. Trust was dangerous. Trust was what had gotten her into this mess in the first place. But Caleb wasn't asking for her trust. He was just offering her a place to land. And maybe that was the difference. 3 days later, the first snow fell. It came early, catching everyone by surprise, turning the valley white overnight. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching it pile up, and felt the baby kick hard. "Soon," she whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." The crew came in stamping snow off their boots, complaining about the cold, arguing about whether this meant an early winter or just a freak storm. Eleanor served stew and fresh bread and tried to ignore the tightness in her belly that had been building all day. Just tension, just nerves, not labor. Not yet. The men left. Caleb lingered. "You're pale," he said. "I'm fine." "You keep saying that. It's getting less convincing." Eleanor gripped the counter as another wave of tightness rolled through her middle. "I said, I'm—" Her water broke, all at once, soaking through her dress, pooling on the floor. They both stared at it. "That's not good," Caleb said. Eleanor laughed, high and panicked. "No, it's really not. Because the baby wasn't due for another 6 weeks. Because the nearest doctor was 2 days away through fresh snow. Because she was standing in a kitchen in the middle of nowhere with a man who knew how to deliver calves, but not babies." "Okay," Caleb's voice cutting through her panic. "Okay, we can do this." "We?" Eleanor's laugh turned hysterical. "You have no idea what you're doing. Neither do you." "I read a book." "Then you're ahead of me." Caleb crossed to her, his face calm in a way that should have been infuriating, but was somehow steadying. "Come on, let's get you to bed." Eleanor let him guide her to her room, trying to breathe through the fear. This was too soon. Everything about this was wrong. Another contraction hit, stronger than the others, and she doubled over. "How far apart?" Caleb asked. "I don't know. They've been coming all day, but I thought—" She gasped. "I thought it was just false labor." "How far apart now?" Eleanor tried to think. "Maybe 10 minutes? 15? That gives us time." Caleb helped her onto the bed. "What do you need?" "Towels, clean sheets, hot water." Her mind was racing, trying to remember everything she'd read, everything her mother had told her. "And you need to get Mac." "Why Mac?" "Because he's the oldest, and maybe he's done this before, and also because I'm not doing this alone with just you." Caleb didn't argue. He left, and Eleanor heard him shouting for Mac. She lay there trying to breathe, trying not to panic. 6 weeks early. That was too early. The baby might not survive. She might not survive. Stop. Breathe. One thing at a time. Mac appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. "Ma'am, have you ever delivered a baby?" "Once, long time ago." "Did it live?" Mac hesitated just long enough that Eleanor knew the answer. "Wonderful," she muttered. "That's just wonderful." Caleb returned with towels and a basin of water. "What else?" "Whiskey," Eleanor said. "For sterilizing, and maybe for me if this goes badly." The contractions came faster, harder. Eleanor lost track of time, lost track of everything except the pain and the fear and Caleb's voice, steady and calm, telling her to breathe. Hours passed. The snow piled higher outside. The room got darker as night fell. "Something's wrong," Eleanor gasped between contractions. "The baby should be here by now." Mac and Caleb exchanged looks. "What?" Eleanor demanded. "What is it?" "The baby's positioned wrong," Mac said quietly. "I can feel the feet instead of the head." Breech. Eleanor's stomach dropped. She'd read about breech births. Most babies didn't survive. Most mothers didn't either. "We need to turn her," Eleanor said. "I don't know how," Mac admitted. "Then I'll tell you." Eleanor grabbed Caleb's hand, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "In my bag, there's a book, Medical Guide for Women. Find the section on difficult births." Caleb found the book, his hand steady despite the situation. He read by lamplight while Eleanor panted through another contraction. "It says to apply pressure to the abdomen," he read, "gentle but firm, attempting to rotate the baby into position." "Can you do that?" Eleanor looked at Mac. The old cowboy's face was grim. "I can try." What followed was the worst hour of Eleanor's life. Mac pressed and manipulated while she screamed, trying to turn a baby who didn't want to move. Caleb held her hand, his face pale but determined. "It's not working," Mac said finally. "She's stuck." Eleanor's vision grayed at the edges. "Then pull her out feet first." "Ma'am, that's the only option we have." Eleanor's voice was steel despite the pain. "Either you try or we both die. Your choice." Mac looked at Caleb, who nodded. "Tell me what to do," Caleb said to Eleanor. You're not...
This
Max
story was
started.
posted on the
My
channel
hands are
west of
steadier than
Betrayal.
yours right now.
Please
Tell
do
me
not
what to do.
repost it in any
So
form.
Eleanor, delirious with pain, walked Caleb through it, how to support the baby's body, when to pull, and when to wait, how to clear the airways once she was out. It took forever. It took no time at all. Eleanor felt like she was being split in half, felt like she was dying, felt like nothing would ever be right again. And then, a cry, thin and reedy, but there. She's breathing, Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. She's breathing. Eleanor tried to see, but her vision was swimming. Is she okay? She's small, Max said. Real small, but she's fighting. Caleb cleaned the baby with shaking hands, wrapped her in a towel, and placed her on Eleanor's chest. Eleanor looked down at her daughter, tiny, red-faced, furious at being born into this cold world 6 weeks too soon. Hello? Eleanor whispered. I'm sorry it was so hard. The baby's eyes opened, dark, unfocused, searching, finding Eleanor's face and holding it. Something inside Eleanor's chest broke open. Not pain this time, something else, something that felt like sunrise. She needs to stay warm, Max said, and you need to rest. You've lost a lot of blood. Eleanor barely heard him. She was staring at her daughter, at this impossible creature who'd survived against every odd. What's her name? Caleb asked. Eleanor hadn't chosen one, hadn't dared to hope she'd need one. She looked at the window, at the snow still falling, at the harsh, beautiful world her daughter had been born into. Clara, she said. Her name is Clara. The baby, Clara, made a small sound and nuzzled against Eleanor's chest, looking for food. She knows what she wants, Caleb said, and for the first time in hours, he smiled. Eleanor guided Clara to nurse, wincing at the unfamiliar sensation. But Clara latched on like she'd been doing it forever, and Eleanor felt tears slide down her face. Thank you, she said to Caleb. To Mac, to anyone who'd listen. Thank you. Mac shuffled out, muttering something about telling the crew. Caleb stayed sitting in the chair beside the bed, his face exhausted. You should rest, Eleanor said. So should you. Can't. Someone has to make sure she keeps breathing. Then I'll watch with you. And he did. All through that first night, while snow buried the valley and wind howled around the house, Caleb Rourke sat beside Eleanor Hayes and her 2 small daughter, keeping watch. Eleanor drifted in and out of sleep, waking every few minutes in a panic to check that Clara was still breathing. Every time she found Caleb there, his eyes on the baby, his expression unreadable. Why are you doing this? She asked once, her voice slurred with exhaustion. Because you need help. That's not an answer. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Maybe I'm tired of watching people struggle alone. Eleanor wanted to push, to demand a real answer, but sleep pulled her under before she could form the words. When she woke again, gray light was filtering through the window. Clara was still nursing, still breathing, still alive, and Caleb was asleep in the chair, his head tilted back, his scarred face peaceful in a way she'd never seen. Eleanor watched him for a moment, this man who'd pulled her daughter into the world with hands meant for roping cattle and mending fences. This stranger who'd become something else without either of them meaning for it to happen. She didn't have a word for what he was to her now. Friend didn't cover it. Employer definitely didn't. Maybe there wasn't a word. Maybe some things existed outside of language. Clara squirmed and Eleanor adjusted her position, trying not to wake Caleb. But his eyes opened anyway, alert immediately. She okay? She's perfect. Eleanor looked down at her daughter, at the impossible miracle she'd made. She's absolutely perfect. Caleb's expression softened. Yeah, she is. And in that moment, with snow falling outside and a 2 small baby breathing steadily in her arms and a scarred rancher watching over them both, Eleanor Hayes felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Hope lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, Eleanor woke to find Clara's skin had taken on a grayish tinge. The baby's breathing was shallow, her tiny chest working too hard for each breath. Eleanor's hands shook as she tried to wake her daughter. Clara, come on, sweetheart. Open your eyes. Clara's eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Eleanor stumbled out of bed, ignoring the pain that still radiated through her body, and carried Clara to the kitchen where she could see better in the lamplight. The baby felt too light, like she was already slipping away. "Caleb," Eleanor's voice cracked. "Caleb, something's wrong." He appeared within seconds, pulling on his shirt, his face instantly alert. One look at Clara, and his jaw tightened. "How long has she been like this?" "I don't know. She was fine when I fed her a few hours ago. I fell asleep, and when I woke up..." Eleanor couldn't finish, couldn't say the words that would make it real. Caleb touched Clara's forehead. "She's burning up." The fever had come from nowhere, fast and vicious. Eleanor had read about this. Babies born too early, their bodies too weak to fight off infection. Most didn't survive the first week. "We need to cool her down," Eleanor said, her mind racing through everything she'd ever learned about fever. "Cold water, we need cold water." "It's winter, you cool her down too much, and..." "I know," Eleanor snapped, then immediately regretted it. "I know, but if we don't bring the fever down, she'll die anyway." They worked together, Caleb bringing water from the pump, while Eleanor stripped Clara down to her skin. The baby cried weakly when the cool cloth touched her, which Eleanor took as a good sign. Crying meant fighting. Mac appeared in the doorway. "Boss, the crew's asking..." He stopped when he saw Clara. "Hell!" "Get the whiskey," Caleb said, "and find me every clean cloth in this house." Mac nodded and disappeared. Eleanor kept bathing Clara's tiny body, watching the fever slowly, agonizingly slowly, begin to drop. The baby's breathing eased slightly. Her color improved from gray to pink. "That's it," Eleanor whispered. "That's my girl. Keep fighting." By noon, the fever had broken. Clara nursed weakly but steadily, her eyes tracking Eleanor's face with what might have been recognition. Eleanor sagged against the headboard, exhausted beyond measure. Caleb sat beside the bed, his face drawn. "She's not out of danger yet," he said quietly. "I know. She needs a doctor, real medicine. We can't get to Laramie, not with this snow." Eleanor looked at the window where white still fell in thick curtains. "We're on our own." "Then we'll manage." Caleb's voice was firm. "Same as everything else." The fever came back that night, and the next night, and the one after that. Each time, Eleanor and Caleb fought it down with cold water and prayer. Though Eleanor didn't believe in prayer anymore, hadn't since Thomas had knelt in church every Sunday while bedding his mistress every Wednesday. But she prayed anyway, to whoever might be listening, to the universe, to nothing at all. On the 7th day, Clara woke up hungry and furious, her cry loud enough to wake the entire house. Eleanor started laughing and couldn't stop, holding her daughter close while tears streamed down her face. "She's going to make it," Max said from the doorway, his weathered face creased in a smile. "That's a fighter's cry right there." Eleanor looked up at him. "How do you know?" "Because quitters don't get that mad about being hungry." He tipped his hat. "You did good, ma'am." After he left, Eleanor finally let herself believe it. Clara was going to survive. Against all odds, against every medical text that said premature babies born in winter without doctors stood no chance. Her daughter was going to live. Caleb found her sitting in the rocking chair Davy had built, Clara asleep in her arms, staring out at the snow-covered valley. "You should be resting," he said. "I've been resting for a week. If I rest any more, I'll forget how to stand." Eleanor shifted Clara slightly. "The crew must be starving." "They're managing. Cole's been cooking." "How bad is it?" "Let's just say they'll be very happy when you're back in the kitchen." Caleb pulled up a chair. "But you're not going back yet, not until you're stronger." "I'm fine." "You're not. You lost a lot of blood, you barely sleep, you need time to heal." Eleanor looked down at Clara. "I don't have time. Winter's here, the crew needs feeding, and I'm already behind on everything." "The crew can wait. Your health can't." "Since when do you care about my health?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and she saw Caleb's expression close off. "Since I pulled your daughter out of you and thought you were both going to die," he said flatly. "That answer your question?" Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." "Yes, you did." Caleb stood. "You meant exactly that. You think because I'm paying you, I don't give a damn about whether you live or die. You think I'm just another man who'll use you up and throw you away. That's not... It is. He moved to the window, his back to her. And maybe I deserve that.
This story was
Maybe I
posted
haven't
on the
given you
channel
reason
west
to
of
think
Betrayal.
otherwise. But I'm
Please do not
telling you now,
repost it in
I
any
care.
form.
Whether you believe it or not. Silence stretched between them, broken only by Clara's soft breathing. Why? Eleanor finally asked. Why do you care? Caleb was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My wife died in childbirth, 8 years ago. The baby with her. I was 200 miles away driving cattle to market. By the time I got home, they were both already in the ground. Eleanor's chest constricted. I didn't know you were married. I don't talk about it. He turned to face her. But I remember what it felt like to come home to that empty house. To know I'd lost everything that mattered and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. So when I see you struggling, see you pushing yourself past what's safe, yeah, I care. Because I already know how that story ends. Eleanor didn't know what to say. What words could possibly bridge the space between his grief and her gratitude? I'm sorry, she said finally. About your wife. About the baby. Her name was Sarah. The baby was going to be named Michael. Caleb's voice was steady, but Eleanor could hear the pain underneath. She was 23. We'd been married 4 years, and I wasn't there when she needed me most. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I knew the birth was coming, knew it was risky, but the cattle drive meant money, and money meant keeping the ranch, so I went anyway, made my choice. You couldn't have known. No, but I live with it anyway. He met her eyes. So when I tell you to rest, to take care of yourself, it's not because I'm your employer, it's because I can't watch someone else die when I could have prevented it. Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. I'll rest. I promise. Caleb nodded once and left. Eleanor sat in the quiet room holding her daughter, thinking about the weight of grief and the strange ways it shaped people. Caleb Rourke had built his whole life around preventing a repeat of his worst moment. And somehow, she and Clara had stumbled into the middle of that. It should have felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like grace. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of healing and learning. Eleanor regained her strength slowly, too slowly for her liking, but she forced herself to listen to her body. Clara grew stronger each day, filling out, her cries growing louder and more demanding. The crew tiptoed around the house, terrified of waking the baby, bringing Eleanor meals and awkward gifts, a carved rattle from Jim, a soft blanket from Samuel, a dozen wildflowers preserved in sugar from Davy that made Eleanor cry. You're all going soft, she told them, but she was smiling. Maybe, Cole admitted, but that baby's the first good thing to happen around here in years. We're allowed to be soft about good things. Eleanor returned to the kitchen in early November, Clara strapped to her chest in a sling Mac had fashioned from old canvas. The crew pretended not to notice when she had to sit down frequently, pretended not to see when Caleb took over the heavy lifting without being asked. They were good men. She'd known that from the start, but now she felt it in her bones. Life settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor cooked with one hand, rocked Clara with the other. The baby slept in a drawer padded with blankets, positioned where Eleanor could see her from anywhere in the kitchen. And slowly, carefully, Eleanor and Caleb built something that looked almost like friendship. He'd appear in the kitchen after dinner, helping wash dishes without comment. She'd pour him coffee, and they'd talk about nothing important, the weather, the cattle, the supplies they'd need before the next snow. It felt normal, safe. That should have been Eleanor's first warning. The rider came on a gray morning in mid-November, materializing out of the mist like something summoned. Eleanor was kneading bread when she heard the shout from the yard. She looked out the window and felt her blood turn to ice. Thomas Hayes sat on a black gelding, dressed in clothes too fine for ranch country, his handsome face set in familiar lines of determination. Her ex-husband. Here. Now. Eleanor's hands started shaking. She looked at Clara, sleeping peacefully in her drawer, and felt panic claw up her throat. Caleb appeared in the doorway. Eleanor, stay inside. What does he want? I don't know yet, but you're not facing him alone. Caleb's voice was steel. Stay inside. He left before she could argue. Eleanor moved to the window. Clara clutched to her chest and watched. Thomas dismounted with practiced grace. He was smiling, his politician's smile, the one that had charmed her into marriage and fooled her into thinking he was decent. "You must be Caleb Rourke." Thomas extended his hand. "Thomas Hayes. I'm here for my wife." "Ex-wife," Caleb said, ignoring the offered hand. "And she's not interested in visitors. I'm sure she'll want to see me when she hears what I have to say." Thomas's smile didn't waver. "I've come to make things right." "Little late for that." "Better late than never, wouldn't you say?" Thomas glanced at the house. "Is Eleanor inside? And the child?" Something in the way he said "the child" made Eleanor's skin crawl. Not "my daughter," not "our baby." The child. Like Clara was a possession instead of a person. Caleb must have heard it too, because his stance shifted subtly, his hand moving closer to the gun on his hip. "What do you want, Hayes?" "To see my family, to make amends." Thomas's voice was smooth, practiced. "I made mistakes. I'm man enough to admit that. But divorce was a rash decision, made in anger. I'm prepared to annul it, take Eleanor and the baby back to Cheyenne, give them the life they deserve." Eleanor's hands tightened on Clara. The life they deserve. As if comfort and respectability could erase what he'd done. As if money could buy back trust. "That's Eleanor's decision," Caleb said, "not mine. Not." "Then let me speak with her." "No." Thomas's smile faltered. "I have a legal right." "You have no rights here. This is my property, and you're not welcome." Caleb's voice was flat. "Get back on your horse and leave." "I'm not leaving without my daughter." There it was, the truth beneath the pretty words. Eleanor saw Caleb's entire body go still. "What did you say?" "The child is mine. Legally, I have a claim. I intend to exercise it." Thomas pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have documentation, a court order granting me custody." "Custody?" Caleb's laugh was harsh. "You divorced Eleanor for adultery, publicly claimed the baby wasn't yours. Now you want custody?" "I was angry. I said things I didn't mean." Thomas's mask was slipping, revealing the calculating businessman underneath. "But blood is blood, and that baby is a Hayes." Eleanor couldn't stay inside anymore. She walked out, Clara in her arms, and both men turned to look at her. Thomas's face lit up. "Eleanor, darling, you look—" "Don't!" Eleanor's voice cut across his. "Don't you dare! I know I hurt you. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this." Thomas took a step forward. Caleb immediately moved between them. "We can be a family again." "We were never a family. We were a marriage of convenience that you destroyed the second someone prettier came along." Eleanor's voice was shaking but steady. "You don't want me back. You want Clara. Why?" Thomas hesitated, and in that pause, Eleanor saw the truth. "The inheritance," she said. "Your uncle's will." Thomas's jaw tightened. "That's not—" "It is. Your Uncle Walter's fortune. The one that goes to your firstborn child." Eleanor felt sick. "You need an heir. Your mistress can't give you children, can she? So now you want Clara." "She's my daughter. I have rights." "You have nothing." Eleanor's voice rose. "You threw us away. You made sure the whole territory knew I was an adulteress, that this baby was a bastard. You can't undo that just because it's suddenly convenient. A judge might disagree." Thomas held up the paper. "This order says I can take the child pending a custody hearing. If you refuse, I can have the sheriff enforce it." Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "You can't. She's mine. She's ours. And I have the resources to provide for her properly. Not—" Thomas gestured at the ranch with barely disguised contempt. "This. This is her home. This is a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere. I can give her education, society, a future." Thomas's voice turned cold. "What can you give her? Poverty? Shame? A mother with a ruined reputation?" The words hit like physical blows. Eleanor knew he was right. She had nothing to offer Clara except love, and love didn't pay for food or clothes or a future. "She's not leaving with you," Caleb said quietly. Thomas turned to him. "This doesn't concern you, Rourke. Eleanor works for me. That baby was born on my property. That makes it my concern. Caleb's hand rested on his gun. And I'm telling you, you're not taking that child. Are you threatening me?
This story was posted
I'm
on the
stating
channel
facts.
west of Betrayal.
You're not welcome
Please
here.
do not
You need to
repost it
leave.
in any form.
Thomas's face flushed red. I have the law on my side. You have a piece of paper. I have 8 armed men who won't take kindly to someone threatening their cook. Caleb's voice was deadly calm. Which do you think carries more weight out here? For a moment, Eleanor thought Thomas might do something stupid. His hand moved toward his coat, and every man in the yard tensed. Then Thomas seemed to recalculate. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and far from any help. This isn't over, he said. I'll be back with the sheriff, with federal marshals if I have to. And when I come back, I'll take what's mine. He mounted his horse and looked down at Eleanor. You're making a mistake. I could give you everything you've lost, respectability, security. All you have to do is be reasonable. Reasonable? Eleanor felt something snap inside her. You want reasonable? Here's reasonable. You're a coward and a liar. You destroyed my life to cover your own sins, and now you want to take my daughter and use her as a pawn in your inheritance games. If you think I'll hand her over without a fight, you don't know me at all. Thomas's expression hardened. I know you're desperate. I know you have no money, no prospects, no way to fight me in court. I know that sooner or later you'll realize I'm your only option. Then you're wrong about all of it. Eleanor lifted her chin. Get off this property before I forget I was raised to be a lady. Thomas stared at her for a long moment. Then he wheeled his horse around and rode away, disappearing into the mist as quickly as he'd appeared. Eleanor stood frozen, watching until he was gone. Then her legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, his arms steady around her and Clara both. I've got you. He's going to take her. Eleanor's voice came out broken. He has money, lawyers, a court order. He's going to take my baby, and I can't stop him. We'll stop him. How? Eleanor looked up at him. You heard him. He's coming back with the law. What are we supposed to do? Shoot a federal marshal? Caleb's jaw was tight. If it comes to that, that's not a solution. That's suicide. Eleanor felt tears spill over. I can't fight him. I have nothing. I am nothing. That's not true. Isn't it? I'm a divorced woman with a bastard child, living on charity, working as a housekeeper. What judge is going to choose me over a wealthy businessman? One who cares about what's right instead of what's profitable. Caleb helped her stand. But you're right about one thing. We can't fight this alone. Then what do we do? Caleb was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, we give you something to fight with. What do you mean? We get married. Eleanor stared at him. What? Married, you and me. Caleb said it matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. A married woman has rights. A child with a father, a legitimate father, is harder to take. You can't be serious. Why not? We already live together, already work together, already trust each other, or we're starting to anyway. His voice softened. And I know what it's like to lose a child. I won't let it happen to you if I can prevent it. Eleanor's mind was reeling. This is insane. You don't marry someone just to protect them? Just to give them a fighting chance? Caleb's eyes were steady on hers. I've done crazier things for worse reasons. But you don't love me. No. But I respect you. I trust you, and I care about what happens to you and Clara. That's more than most marriages start with. Eleanor looked down at Clara, sleeping peacefully against her chest, unaware that her entire future hung in the balance. Thomas would come back. He'd bring lawyers and judges and all the power that money could buy. And he'd take Clara, not because he loved her, but because she was worth something. Unless Eleanor could prove she had something to offer too. Stability. A family. A father. It was insane, reckless, a marriage of pure desperation, but maybe desperation was all she had left. If we do this, Eleanor said slowly, it's a business arrangement, nothing more. You get help running the ranch. I get protection. Agreed. And when Clara's safe, when Thomas gives up, we can end it. Quietly. No hard feelings. Caleb nodded. if that's what you want. I don't know what I want anymore. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. A month ago, I wanted my old life back. Now I'd burn it to the ground to keep my daughter safe. Then say yes. Marry me. Let me help you fight. Eleanor looked at this scarred, quiet man who'd offered her sanctuary when she had nowhere else to go, who'd pulled her daughter into the world with his own hands, who'd stood between her and her ex-husband without hesitation. He wasn't offering love, wasn't promising happily ever after. He was offering a chance, and that was all she needed. Yes, Eleanor said, I'll marry you. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Relief, maybe, or determination. We'll ride to Laramie tomorrow, find a justice of the peace, make it legal before Thomas comes back. Tomorrow? Eleanor's voice rose. That's the only smart move. Every day we wait is another day he can challenge this. Caleb's voice was firm. We do this fast and we do this right. Agreed? Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted time to think, to process, to make sure she wasn't making another catastrophic mistake. But time was a luxury she didn't have. Agreed, she said. They married 3 days later in a cramped office in Laramie, with Mac and a bored clerk as witnesses. Eleanor wore her only decent dress. Caleb wore clean clothes that still smelled like horse. Clara cried through the entire ceremony. I now pronounce you man and wife, the justice said, barely looking up from his paperwork. And just like that, Eleanor Hayes became Eleanor Rourke. They rode back to the ranch in silence. Clara bundled between them, the marriage certificate folded in Eleanor's pocket like a shield. She'd married for protection this time instead of love. She'd married a man she barely knew who'd promised her nothing except a fighting chance. It should have felt like defeat. Instead, it felt like the first real choice she'd made in months. That night, after the crew had celebrated with whiskey and terrible singing, after Clara had finally fallen asleep, Eleanor stood in her room. Still her room, they'd agreed, nothing about their sleeping arrangements would change, and looked at the marriage certificate. Mrs. Eleanor Rourke. The name felt strange, foreign, like putting on someone else's clothes. A knock on the door. You still awake? Caleb's voice. Eleanor opened the door to find him standing there, holding a piece of paper. What is it? Deed to the ranch. I'm adding your name to it. Eleanor's eyes widened. What? No, that's not... We agreed this was just... I know what we agreed. But if Thomas is going to fight this, he'll look for any crack in the armor. Married in name only, separate finances, no shared property. All of that makes it easier to claim this is a sham. Caleb held out the paper. This makes it real. Legally, half of everything I own is now yours. Caleb, I can't accept. You're not accepting. You're protecting your daughter. His voice was steady. This isn't about us. It's about making sure no court can say you married me for anything but legitimate reasons. Eleanor took the deed with shaking hands. It was real. Her name, next to his, on property worth more than she'd ever owned in her life. Why are you doing this? She asked. Really? Don't give me some story about guilt or obligation. Why risk everything for me and Clara? Caleb met her eyes. Because the day I watched you step off that stagecoach, I saw someone who'd been thrown away by people who should have protected her. And I know what that feels like. I've been that person. He paused. Maybe I can't fix what happened to me, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to you. Eleanor's throat tightened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive whatever Thomas throws at us next. We will. Eleanor surprised herself with how certain she sounded. We've survived everything else. Caleb nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. Eleanor? Yes? I'm glad you said yes to the marriage. I know it wasn't what you wanted, but it's exactly what I needed, Eleanor interrupted. There's a difference. He smiled, a real smile, rare and genuine. Yeah, there is. After he left, Eleanor lay in bed with Clara beside her, the marriage certificate and deed on her dresser, and thought about the strange shape her life had taken. She'd married twice now, once for love that turned out to be a lie, once for survival that might turn into something real. She didn't know which scared her more. Clara stirred, making soft sounds in her sleep. Eleanor gathered her
This
clothes,
story was
breathing
posted
in the
on the
baby
channel
smell
west
of
of
milk and
Betrayal.
warmth and
Please do not
impossible hope.
repost it in any
"We're
form.
going to be okay," she whispered. "Your father, your real father, the one who chose you, he's going to make sure of it." Outside, the Wyoming wind howled across the valley. Winter was deepening, settling in for the long haul. And somewhere out there, Thomas Hayes was planning his next move. But for tonight, Eleanor Rourke was safe in a home that was legally hers, married to a man who'd promised to stand beside her, holding a daughter who was alive against all odds. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what she'd imagined her life would look like, but it was hers. And she'd fight to keep it. Thomas came back exactly 2 weeks later, and this time he brought an army. Eleanor was washing dishes when she heard the horses. Too many horses? She looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. 6 men. Thomas in front, flanked by 2 men in suits who had lawyer written all over them. Behind them, 3 others wearing badges, a sheriff and 2 deputies, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Clara was napping in her drawer. Eleanor dried her hands, checked that her daughter was still breathing, and walked outside before they could knock. Caleb was already in the yard, the entire crew spread out behind him. 8 against 6, but Eleanor knew numbers didn't matter when the law was involved. "Mr. Hayes," Caleb said, his voice flat. "Back so soon." Thomas dismounted, his expensive boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. "I told you I'd return. I'm a man of my word." "That makes one of us," Eleanor said, stepping forward. Thomas's eyes found her, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. She looked different than she had 2 weeks ago. Stronger, steadier, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a dress that actually fit now that her body was healing. "Eleanor, I was hoping we could avoid unpleasantness." Thomas gestured to the lawyers. "These gentlemen are here to help us reach an agreement. The only agreement I want is for you to leave and never come back." One of the lawyers, older, gray-haired, with eyes like a shark, stepped forward. "Mrs. Hayes, Mrs. Rourke," Eleanor corrected. The lawyer's eyebrows rose. "I beg your pardon? My name is Eleanor Rourke. I remarried 2 weeks ago in Laramie. It's all perfectly legal if you'd like to verify." She pulled the marriage certificate from her pocket, where she'd been keeping it like a talisman. "My husband and I are happy to show you the paperwork." Thomas's face went white, then red. "You what?" "I got married to Caleb Rourke, the man whose property you're currently trespassing on." Eleanor's voice was steady, though her heart was hammering. "Which means your custody claim is based on outdated information." The shark-eyed lawyer took the certificate, examined it, and handed it back with a frown. "This changes things." "It changes nothing," Thomas snapped. "She's trying to circumvent a legal order. This is obviously a sham marriage designed to Designed to what?" Caleb interrupted. "Provide stability for her daughter? Give the child a father and a home? How exactly is that a sham?" "You barely know each other." "We've known each other long enough." Caleb moved to stand beside Eleanor, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Long enough to know we want to build a life together. Long enough to know we're better as a family than apart." Eleanor glanced at him. He was lying, or at least stretching the truth so thin it was transparent. But his face showed nothing but calm certainty. The sheriff, a heavy-set man with a tired expression, cleared his throat.
This story was posted
"Mr.
on the
Hayes,
channel
if the
west
lady's
of
remarried
Betrayal.
and the
Please
marriage
do not
is legal,
repost it in any
it's a
form.
fraud. Anyone can see that." "Can they?" The second lawyer, younger and sharper, was studying Eleanor and Caleb with interest. "Because from where I'm standing, I see a woman who works for her husband's ranch, lives in his house, and recently gave birth to a child who now has a legal father. That's not fraud. That's a family." Thomas turned on him. "Whose side are you on?" "The law's side, which says that a married woman's husband has more claim to her children than her ex-husband." The young lawyer shrugged. "Unless you can prove the marriage is fraudulent, which means proving they don't live together, don't share assets, don't function as a married couple, you don't have a case." Eleanor felt a surge of hope, quickly squashed by Thomas's smile. That calculating smile that meant he'd planned for this. "Then I suppose we'll need to investigate the legitimacy of this marriage." Thomas pulled another paper from his coat. "I've petitioned the court for a hearing to determine whether Mrs. Rourke He said her new name like it tasted bad, entered into this marriage under false pretenses, whether she's using it to avoid legal obligations. Legal obligations? Eleanor's voice rose. You divorced me, publicly humiliated me, claimed Clara wasn't yours. You have no legal obligations to us. I have obligations to my daughter. And if this marriage is proven to be a sham, I'll have full grounds to pursue custody. Thomas's smile widened. The hearing is in 3 weeks, in Cheyenne. I look forward to seeing you both there. He mounted his horse, the lawyers following suit. The sheriff lingered, looking uncomfortable. Ma'am, he said quietly, for what it's worth, I think you're in the right. But the law's complicated. You might want to get your own lawyer. With what money? Eleanor asked bitterly. The sheriff had no answer for that. He tipped his hat and rode after the others. Eleanor stood in the yard, watching them disappear, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under her again. Just when she thought she'd found solid footing, just when she thought she had a chance. We'll fight this, Caleb said. With what? We don't have lawyers. We don't have money for lawyers. Eleanor turned to him. And they're right. This marriage is a sham. We got married to protect Clara, not because we love each other. Any lawyer worth his salt will tear us apart in court. Then we make it real. Eleanor stared at him. What? We make it real, starting now. Caleb's voice was firm. We act like a married couple. Share a room, share meals, share a life. Give them nothing to question. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. If we're going to convince a judge this marriage is legitimate, we have to believe it ourselves first. Eleanor felt panic rising. You want to, what, pretend to be in love? Pretend this is some great romance? No, I want to be honest about what we are. Partners. People who chose each other for practical reasons and are making it work. Caleb's eyes were steady on hers. That's not fraud. That's half the marriages in the territory. But sharing a room, I'll sleep on the floor, or we'll put a divider up, whatever makes you comfortable. His voice softened. I'm not asking you to be my wife in every sense, Eleanor. I'm asking you to let people see us as a team, as a family, because that's what we need to be to win this. Eleanor looked back at the house where Clara was sleeping, where her daughter was safe and warm and loved. Thomas would take that away, would take Clara to Cheyenne and raise her as a pawn in his inheritance games, surrounded by luxury but starved of affection. Eleanor would die before she let that happen. All right, she said, we make it real. But I need you to promise me something. What? If we lose, if the judge rules against us, you don't fight it. You let me go quietly. I won't have you losing everything because of me. Caleb's jaw tightened. We're not going to lose. But if we do, we won't. He said it with such certainty that Eleanor almost believed him. Now come on, we've got 3 weeks to become the most convincing married couple in Wyoming. The transformation started that night. Caleb moved his things into Eleanor's room. Not many things, he traveled light, and they rigged up a blanket as a divider, creating 2 separate spaces within the same 4 walls. It was awkward, painfully, obviously awkward. Eleanor changed for bed behind the blanket, hyper-aware of every sound Caleb made on the other side. When she finally lay down with Clara beside her, she could hear his breathing, slow and steady. This is insane, she whispered. Probably, Caleb agreed from the darkness. But we're committed now. Are you always this calm about insane decisions? Wouldn't have survived this long if I wasn't. Eleanor smiled despite herself. Good night, Caleb. Good night, Eleanor. The next morning, they started acting like a married couple in front of the crew. It felt like performing in a play where neither of them knew their lines. Caleb touched her shoulder when he passed, an awkward gesture that made Eleanor jump. She poured his coffee first, which made the crew exchange knowing looks. They sat beside each other at meals, their knees occasionally bumping, both of them immediately jerking away. This is painful to watch, Max said on the 3rd day. What is? Eleanor asked, too defensive. You two, tiptoeing around each other like you're afraid of breaking something. The old cowboy shook his head. Real married
This story
couples
was
ain't that
posted
careful.
on the channel
They
west
argue,
of
they
Betrayal.
laugh, they
Please do not
exist in the same
repost
space
it in any
without thinking
form.
about it. We're still adjusting, Caleb said. You're still lying to yourselves. Max stood, taking his plate to the sink. You want to convince a judge you're married? Start by convincing yourselves. After he left, Eleanor and Caleb sat in silence. He's right, Eleanor finally said. I know. So what do we do? Caleb thought for a moment. We stop trying so hard. Stop performing for an audience. Just be. I don't know how to just be anymore. Eleanor's voice cracked. I spent 4 years being the perfect wife to Thomas, and it still wasn't enough. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be yourself. Caleb reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. The woman who cursed at my crew on her first day, who stitched up men twice her size without flinching, who fought through a deadly birth to save her daughter. That's who I married, not some performing doll. Eleanor looked at his hand, hovering near hers, not quite touching. She thought about trust and risk, and all the ways people hurt each other. Then she closed the distance, her fingers linking with his. All right, she said, no more performing, just us. Caleb's hand tightened on hers. Just us. Things got easier after that. Not perfect. They still had moments of awkward collision, still forgot sometimes that they were supposed to be convincing. But slowly, the act became less of an act. Eleanor started leaning against Caleb when she was tired, his shoulder solid and steady. Caleb started checking on Clara without being asked, his scarred hands gentle as he adjusted her blanket. They developed rhythms. Eleanor cooking while Caleb cleaned, their movements synchronized without thinking about it. The crew noticed, stopped giving them knowing looks, and started treating them like any other married couple, which meant occasionally rolling their eyes at their arguments and making jokes about newlyweds. You two planning on having more kids? Davy asked one morning, then immediately turned red. Sorry, I shouldn't have. It's fine, Eleanor said, surprising herself. And I don't know. We haven't talked about it. She glanced at Caleb, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. Later, after the crew had left for the day, he brought it up. Would you want more children? Eleanor was kneading bread, her hands working automatically. I don't know. Maybe. Someday. When things are more settled, she paused. Why? Just wondering if we need to add that to our story, for the hearing. Right, the story. Eleanor punched the dough harder than necessary. Almost forgot this was all pretend. It's not all pretend. Eleanor looked up. Caleb was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his expression serious. What do you mean? I mean Clara's real. Our marriage is legal. The life we're building, that's real too, even if it started for the wrong reasons. He pushed off the doorframe. I'm not pretending to care about what happens to you and Clara. I'm not pretending to want you here. Eleanor's throat tightened. But you don't love me. No, but I could. The words were quiet, almost lost in the kitchen sounds. If you wanted me to. Eleanor stood frozen, her hands covered in flour, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Before she could respond, Clara started crying from the other room. The moment broke. I should... Eleanor gestured vaguely. Yeah, go ahead. Eleanor fled to tend to her daughter, her mind spinning. I could.
This story was posted on the channel West of Betrayal.
Did she want to risk
Please
her
do
heart
not
again on a
repost
man
it
who'd
in any
started as
form.
a stranger and become something else entirely? She didn't know. Wasn't sure she was capable of knowing anymore. But the question stayed with her, wedging itself into the spaces between her thoughts. The weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Caleb hired a lawyer, a woman named Catherine Mills from Laramie, who specialized in family law and had a reputation for winning impossible cases. I won't lie to you, Catherine said at their first meeting. This is going to be difficult. Thomas Hayes has money and connections. He can make you look irresponsible, unstable. But we're married now, Eleanor protested. That has to count for something. It does. But they'll argue it's a marriage of convenience, that you're using Caleb to keep your daughter. Catherine's sharp eyes moved between them. So I need to know, is that true? Eleanor and Caleb looked at each other. Yes, Eleanor said. At first, I married Caleb to protect Clara. Catherine's expression didn't change. And now? Now it's more complicated. Eleanor reached for Caleb's hand without thinking. Now it's real. Define real. We live together, work together, take care of Clara together. Caleb's voice was steady. We're partners. Isn't that what marriage is supposed to be? Catherine studied them for a long moment. Then she smiled, sharp and satisfied. That's what you tell the judge. Not a love story, a partnership. Two people who chose each other for practical reasons and discovered they were better together than apart. That's honest. That's defensible. She pulled out a notebook. Now, let's talk about Thomas Hayes' weaknesses. They spent hours going over everything. Thomas's affair, his public claims that Clara wasn't his, the divorce papers where he'd accused Eleanor of adultery with no proof, his sudden interest in custody only after his uncle's will became relevant. He's greedy and transparent, Catherine said. That's good for us. But he'll paint you as desperate and scheming. We need to flip that. Show that you made careful, responsible choices given impossible circumstances. Getting thrown off a stagecoach in a hostile town doesn't feel very responsible, Eleanor said. No, but accepting honest work does. Marrying a man who could provide stability does. Fighting for your daughter does. Catherine's voice was firm. You're not a victim, Mrs. Rourke. You're a survivor. Don't forget that. The night before they left for Cheyenne, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to Clara's soft breathing, Caleb's steady snoring from the other side of the blanket. Caleb? She whispered. The snoring stopped. Yeah? What if we lose? Silence. Then the blanket shifted and Caleb's face appeared in the gap. We won't. But if we do, then we appeal. We fight. We don't stop fighting until Clara is safe. You can't promise that. Watch me. His eyes were dark in the lamplight, but she could see the determination there. I've lost too much already, Eleanor. I'm not losing this. Not losing you. Not losing her. Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. Why do you care so much? Caleb reached through the gap in the blanket, his hand finding hers. Because you're mine now. You and Clara both. And I protect what's mine. It should have sounded possessive. Instead, it sounded like a vow. Eleanor held his hand and let herself believe, just for a moment, that everything would be all right. They arrived in Cheyenne 2 days later, the whole crew coming along as witnesses and support. Catherine had secured them rooms at a boarding house that didn't ask questions, and they spent the day before the hearing going over their testimony until Eleanor's head spun. Just tell the truth, Catherine kept saying. Simple, honest, no embellishment. The courtroom was smaller than Eleanor expected, wood-paneled and cold, with windows that let in weak winter light. Thomas sat on one side with his lawyers, looking confident and expensive. Eleanor sat on the other with Caleb and Catherine, her hands shaking. Clara was with Mac, back at the boarding house. Eleanor had wanted to bring her, but Catherine had advised against it. Let the judge see you as a woman fighting for her child, she'd said. Not a woman using her child to manipulate the court. The judge was a gray-haired man named Morrison, no relation to the judge who'd granted the divorce, thank heaven, with a face that gave nothing away. Thomas's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, we're here because Mr. Hayes has been denied access to his biological daughter, a child he wishes to know, to support, to raise as his own. His own? Catherine was on her feet. Your Honor, may I remind the court that Mr. Hayes divorced my client on grounds of adultery, specifically claiming that the child in question was not his, that he publicly disavowed any paternity, that he fought to ensure Mrs. Rourke, at the time Mrs. Hayes, had no claim to his property or support. Circumstances change, Thomas's lawyer said smoothly. Mr. Hayes was hurt and angry. He said things in the heat of the moment that he now regrets. He's prepared to acknowledge paternity and provide for the child. How convenient, Catherine's voice dripped acid. And does this sudden change of heart have anything to do with his uncle's recently updated will, the one that leaves a substantial fortune to his firstborn child? The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Order! Thomas's face had gone red. His lawyer looked flustered. Your Honor, Catherine continued, this isn't about a father's love. It's about a man trying to claim a child he abandoned the moment she became inconvenient. A man who destroyed my client's reputation, left her destitute, and is now using the courts to profit from the daughter he never wanted. That's a lie. Thomas was on his feet. I want to know my daughter. I want to give her the life she deserves. The life she deserves? Eleanor stood before she could stop herself. You mean the life where she's raised by a man who sees her as a commodity? Where she's valued for her inheritance instead of herself? Mrs. Rourke, Judge Morrison said sternly, you'll have your chance to speak. Eleanor sat, her heart pounding. Caleb's hand found hers under the table, squeezing. The hearing dragged on for hours. Thomas's lawyers painted Eleanor as unstable, desperate, willing to marry a stranger to keep her child. They brought up her divorce, her lack of resources, her history of poor judgment. Catherine countered every point, showed the marriage certificate, the deed to the ranch with Eleanor's name on it, testimony from the crew about how Eleanor had transformed the household, how she and Caleb functioned as a team. Then Caleb took the stand. Mr. Rourke, Thomas's lawyer said, you married Mrs. Rourke, very quickly. Some might say suspiciously quickly. Why the rush? Because she needed help. Clara needed a father. And Caleb paused, his eyes finding Eleanor's across the courtroom. I needed a family. A family. How convenient that this realization came just as Mr. Hayes announced his intention to seek custody. It wasn't convenient. It was necessary. Caleb's voice was steady. Eleanor had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Your client made sure of that when he destroyed her reputation and threw her out with nothing. I offered her work. She proved herself. And somewhere along the way, we became something more than employer and employee. Something more. Can you define that? Caleb was quiet for a moment. We became partners. People who relied on each other, who trusted each other, who built something together. He looked directly at the judge. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Two people choosing each other every day, not because it's easy or convenient, but because it's right. Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. Then it was her turn to testify. She told the truth, all of it. The affair, the divorce, the stagecoach, Caleb's offer, Clara's birth, the marriage. I married Caleb to protect my daughter, she said clearly. I won't pretend otherwise. But what started as protection became something real. He's been more of a father to Clara in 2 months than Thomas ever would be in a lifetime. Because he's after your gratitude, Thomas's lawyer suggested. Your dependence? Because he's a decent man. Eleanor's voice was firm. Because he helped me when no one else would. Because he sees Clara as a person, not a prize. The lawyer smiled. And yet you claim to love him, after knowing him for less than 3 months. Eleanor opened her mouth, closed it. Love. She hadn't said love, hadn't let herself think that word. I didn't say I loved him, she said slowly. I said our marriage was real. There's a difference. Is there? Because if you don't love your husband, how can you claim this marriage is legitimate? Eleanor looked at Caleb. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, and she realized the entire courtroom was waiting for her answer. The truth was complicated, messy. She didn't know if what she felt was love or gratitude or just desperate hope, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty.
This story was posted on the channel west of Betrayal.
Every
Please
day,
do not repost
choose
it
him.
in any form.
I choose to trust him with my daughter. I choose to build a life with him. I choose to believe in the future we're creating together. She met the lawyer's eyes. Maybe that's not love yet, but it's honest, which is more than I can say for my first marriage. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison looked at Eleanor, then at Caleb, then at Thomas. I'll hear closing arguments, then I'll make my decision. The arguments were predictable. Thomas's lawyers painted Eleanor as a fraud. Catherine painted Thomas as a greedy opportunist. When it was over, Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair. I've heard enough. Here's what I see. A woman who made the best of terrible circumstances. A man who offered help when no one else would. And a marriage that may have started for practical reasons, but has become something real and legally binding. Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear. I also see, the judge continued, a man who abandoned his wife and child, destroyed her reputation, and is now attempting to reclaim that child for financial gain. He looked directly at Thomas. Mr. Hayes, you had your chance to be a father. You chose to walk away. You don't get to change your mind when it becomes profitable. Thomas went pale. Custody of Clara Rourke remains with her mother, Eleanor Rourke, and her legal father, Caleb Rourke. Mr. Hayes's petition is denied. Case dismissed. The gavel came down. Eleanor couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't believe it was over. Then Caleb's arms were around her and she was crying, and the crew was cheering, and Catherine was smiling her sharp, satisfied smile. "We won," Eleanor whispered against Caleb's chest. "We actually won." "Told you we would," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. Across the courtroom, Thomas sat frozen, his face white with rage. But there was nothing he could do. The judge had ruled. Clara was safe. They left the courthouse into cold winter sunshine. Eleanor felt light, like she might float away if Caleb wasn't holding her hand. "Let's go home," he said. Home. The word settled in Eleanor's chest, warm and certain. "Yes," she agreed. "Let's go home." The ride back to the ranch felt different. Lighter somehow, despite the winter cold that bit through their coats and the wind that never seemed to stop. Eleanor sat beside Caleb on the wagon seat, Clara bundled between them, and for the first time in months she wasn't looking over her shoulder waiting for the next disaster. They'd won. Clara was legally theirs. Thomas couldn't touch them. The crew rode alongside, whooping and singing off-key songs about victory and justice, drunk on relief more than the whiskey they'd shared at the boarding house. Mac kept grinning at Eleanor like she'd personally hung the moon. "You did good up there," he said when they stopped to water the horses. "Real good. I just told the truth." "That's what made it good." Mac squinted at the horizon. "Most people can't do that when their whole world's on the line. They panic, start making things up. But you stood there and owned every bit of it." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "I had good people beside me." "Yeah, you did." Mac glanced at Caleb, who was checking the wagon wheel. "And you still do." They reached the ranch just after dark. The house looked small and worn in the lamplight, nothing like the grand homes Eleanor had once imagined living in. But when she stepped inside carrying Clara and felt the warmth from the stove and smelled the familiar scent of wood smoke and coffee, something in her chest loosened. This was home. Not perfect, not fancy, but hers. The crew dispersed to the bunkhouse, still celebrating. Eleanor put Clara down in her drawer. She'd need a proper cradle soon, the baby was growing fast, and started making coffee out of habit more than necessity. Caleb came in carrying their bags. He set them down and stood there, awkward in a way he hadn't been in weeks. "We should talk," he said. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. Now that the crisis is over, now that Clara's safe, he's going to want to end it. Go back to being employer and employee. Separate lives under the same roof. She'd agreed to that. Had promised him an exit when this was done. But somewhere between the courthouse and here, she'd forgotten that was supposed to be temporary. "All right," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Talk." Caleb pulled out a chair, sat down heavily. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "In the courthouse, when you were testifying, you said you choose me." "I did." "Did you mean it?" Eleanor's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind I need an answer to." Caleb's eyes were steady on hers. "Because if you meant it, if you actually want this marriage to be real, not just legal, then I need to know. But if you were just saying what the lawyer told you to say, if you want to go back to how things were before what?" Eleanor turned to face him. "Before we shared a room? Before we started acting like a team? Before you stood up in court and called us a family? Before we had to pretend?" "I wasn't pretending." The words came out fierce. "Not in that courtroom. Not for weeks now. I thought you knew that." Caleb stood, crossed to her in 3 strides. "I didn't want to assume. Didn't want to push for something you weren't ready to give." "And what is it you want me to give?" "A real chance." His voice was rough. "Not marriage because you had to. Not partnership because it was practical. I want—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. "I want what we've been building. For real. Forever." Eleanor's heart was hammering. You said you didn't love me. I said I could, if you wanted me to. Caleb's hand came up, hesitated, then gently touched her face. Turns out, I didn't need permission. It happened anyway. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. When? I don't know. Maybe when you cursed at my crew on day 1. Maybe when you delivered Clara and looked at her like she was the whole world. Maybe it's been happening this whole time and I was too stupid to notice. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. But I know I don't want to lose it. Don't want to lose you. You won't. Eleanor's voice cracked. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise. She reached up, covered his hand with hers. I choose you, Caleb. Not because I have to, because I want to. Because somewhere between that stagecoach and now, you became the only future I can imagine. Caleb's expression shifted, relief and something deeper flooding his face. Then he was kissing her, gentle at first, then deeper, his hands tangling in her hair while hers gripped his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor laughed shakily. So, I guess we're really married now. Guess so. Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Think you can stand being stuck with me? I've survived worse. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. Fine. I can't imagine being stuck with anyone else. Better? Much. He kissed her again, softer this time. We should probably take down that blanket divider. Eleanor felt heat rush to her face. We should probably do a lot of things. Yeah, but one thing at a time. Caleb stepped back, his hand finding hers. We've got forever to figure it out. Forever. The word should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like a promise she wanted to keep. Spring came late that year, fighting its way through a winter that refused to let go. But eventually the snow melted, the valley turned green, and Clara started sitting up on her own, her dark eyes watching everything with fierce curiosity. The ranch thrived. Caleb expanded the herd, hired 2 more men. Eleanor turned the kitchen into the heart of the operation, feeding not just the crew, but occasionally neighbors who'd heard about the woman who could make bread that tasted like heaven. Word spread about the court case, too, about Eleanor Rourke, who'd stood up to her wealthy ex-husband and won, about Caleb Rourke, who'd married a disgraced woman and didn't care what anyone thought. The town of Cedar Ridge, which had turned Eleanor away, suddenly wanted to make amends. The boarding house owner appeared one day with an apology and an offer of free lodging anytime Eleanor was in town. The sheriff who'd escorted Thomas to the ranch came by to apologize for his part in the intimidation. Eleanor accepted their apologies with grace she didn't entirely feel. She hadn't forgotten how they'd treated her, how they'd been ready to let her freeze in the street. But she also understood survival in a small territory meant making peace with your neighbors. You're better than me, Caleb said after the sheriff left. I'd have told him where to shove his apology. I wanted to, but we live here now. Our daughter's going to grow up here. Making enemies doesn't help anyone. When did you get so wise? Eleanor snorted. Probably around the time I stopped caring what people thought of me. Turns out that frees up a lot of energy for actual thinking. They were sitting on the porch, watching Clara play with the wooden blocks Jim had carved. The baby was nearly 7 months old now, sturdy and determined, crawling everywhere and trying to pull herself up on furniture.
This story was posted on the channel west of
She's going to
Betrayal.
walk soon.
Please do not
Eleanor said.
repost it in any form.
Yeah, then we're in trouble. Caleb smiled, watching Clara grab for his boot and miss. She's got your stubbornness, and your tendency to rush into things without thinking. That's called courage. That's called being reckless. But Eleanor was smiling too. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from knowing someone well enough that words weren't always necessary. Eleanor had learned Caleb's rhythms, knew when he needed space and when he needed company, when his quiet meant he was thinking and when it meant he was hurting. He'd learned hers too, knew when her snappishness in the kitchen meant she was tired, not angry. Knew when she needed to talk about her past and when she needed to forget it existed. They'd had their first real fight 3 weeks after the court case, something stupid about supplies and whether they needed more flour. Eleanor had thrown a dish towel at him. Caleb had stormed out. They'd both felt ridiculous by dinner and apologized while trying not to laugh. Is this what marriage is supposed to be like? Eleanor had asked. Arguing about flour? I think so. Sarah and I used to fight about the stupidest things. Then we'd make up and wonder what we were fighting about in the first place. It was the first time he'd mentioned Sarah without pain in his voice. Eleanor had taken it as a good sign. Now, watching Clara determinedly try to eat one of her blocks, Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the absence of constant fear. I never thanked you, she said suddenly. Caleb looked at her. For what? Everything. Giving me a job when I had nothing, helping deliver Clara, marrying me, fighting for us. You don't need to thank me for any of that. I do, though, because you didn't have to do any of it. You could have left me in Cedar Ridge, could have told Thomas to take Clara and stayed out of it, could have ended this marriage the second the judge ruled in our favor. Eleanor met his eyes. But you didn't. You chose us, and I need you to know that matters. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over, took her hand. I chose us because you're the best thing that's happened to me in 8 years. You and Clara both. So if anyone should be saying thank you, it's me. For what? Being a burden on your ranch? For making it a home instead of just a place I sleep. His hand tightened on hers. For giving me a reason to build something that lasts instead of just surviving day to day. Clara chose that moment to topple over, landing on her padded bottom with a surprised squawk. Eleanor started to get up, but Caleb was faster, scooping the baby into his arms and making her giggle by pretending to drop her. Eleanor watched them. This scarred, quiet man who'd never expected to be a father, and the daughter who'd claimed him as completely as if they shared blood. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. I love you, she said. Caleb looked up, Clara still in his arms. What? I love you. I probably have for weeks, but I was too scared to say it. Too scared you didn't feel the same way. Too scared of jinxing what we'd built. Eleanor stood, cross to him. But I'm done being scared. I love you, Caleb Rourke, and I'm not sorry we married for practical reasons, because it led us here. Caleb shifted Clara to one arm and pulled Eleanor close with the other. I love you too. Have since before I knew what to call it. He kissed her forehead. And I'm not sorry either. Clara squirmed between them, making annoyed baby sounds at being squished. They both laughed and separated slightly, but stayed close. A family unit that had started as survival and become something neither of them could imagine living without. That night, after Clara was asleep and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Caleb lay in their bed, their actual shared bed now, no blanket divider, no pretense, and talked about the future. We should expand the house, Caleb said. Add a proper nursery for Clara, maybe another room or two. Planning on filling them? Maybe. If you want more children. Eleanor thought about it. The idea didn't terrify her the way it once had. Maybe, someday. Let's get through Clara learning to walk first. Fair. Caleb was quiet for a moment. What about the ranch? You have any thoughts on how we should run things? Me? It's half yours, legally. You should have a say. Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow. You actually want my opinion on cattle and horses? I want your opinion on everything. You're smarter than me about most things. That's not true. It is. You see things I miss, like how Davy's been looking sad lately. I hadn't noticed until you mentioned it. Turns out his mother's sick back in Kansas. We sent him home for a month with pay because you noticed. That's just paying attention. Exactly. And I'm asking you to keep paying attention. To the crew, the ranch, our life. Help me build something worth keeping. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. You really mean that? I really mean that. Caleb pulled her close. We're partners, Eleanor, in everything. That's how this works. She settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure. All right, partners. In everything. In everything, he agreed. The years that followed weren't easy. Ranching never was, and Wyoming weather seemed determined to test them at every turn. They had drought years and good years, winters that nearly broke them, and springs that made up for it. They had arguments and reconciliations, moments of doubt, and moments of certainty. Clara grew into a fierce, curious child who could ride before she could write, and ask questions that made both her parents scramble for answers. She had Eleanor's determination and Caleb's quiet strength, and she knew beyond any doubt that she was loved. When she was 3, Eleanor gave birth to a son they named Michael, after Caleb's first child who'd never drawn breath. It was Eleanor's way of honoring the past while building the future, and Caleb cried when she told him the name she'd chosen. When Michael was 2, they had another daughter, Grace, who was sweet-tempered and gentle in a way that baffled Clara. The 3 children became inseparable. Clara appointed herself their protector and took the job seriously. The ranch expanded. They added cattle, horses, even tried sheep for a year before deciding sheep were more trouble than they were worth. They hired more crew, built more buildings, turned the struggling operation into something that not only survived, but thrived. Eleanor's kitchen became legendary. Neighboring ranchers would time their visits to meals, hoping for an invitation to stay. Eleanor pretended to be annoyed, but secretly loved feeding people, loved seeing them leave satisfied and grateful. The town of Cedar Ridge, which had rejected her so completely, eventually came around entirely. The boarding house owner's daughter asked Eleanor to be godmother to her first child. The sheriff who'd escorted Thomas to the ranch became a regular visitor, bringing his wife and children for Sunday dinners. Eleanor accepted it all with a grace that came from understanding human nature. People were capable of cruelty and kindness in equal measure, and most of them were just trying to survive in a world that demanded too much. She never forgot, though. Never forgot what it felt like to stand in that street with nowhere to go. And when travelers came through looking desperate, Eleanor always found room at her table, work if they needed it, a chance if they'd take it. "You're collecting strays," Caleb told her after she'd hired their 5th down-on-their-luck drifter. "Says the man who picked up a pregnant stranger off a stagecoach." Fair point. Thomas Hayes never returned. They heard through the territorial gossip mill that he'd married his mistress, who'd promptly left him when she discovered the inheritance wasn't as large as promised. He'd lost his business and some bad investments and moved east, chasing opportunities that never quite materialized. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in his downfall, just relief that he was gone and couldn't hurt Clara. On Clara's 10th birthday, when the girl asked about her biological father, Eleanor told her the truth. All of it. The marriage, the divorce, the court case. How Caleb had become her real father by choice instead of blood. "So he didn't want me," Clara said, processing it. "He wanted what you represented, money, status. But he never knew you well enough to want the real you." Eleanor pulled her daughter close. "Your pa, though, Caleb, he chose you before you were born. He fought for you. He loves you. That's what matters." "I know." Clara looked at Eleanor seriously. "I'm glad you married Pa instead of staying with that other man. He sounds awful." Eleanor laughed despite the seriousness of the conversation. "He was. Trust me, I got the better deal." "Does Pa know you think that?" "I tell him every day." And she did. Not always with words. Sometimes it was in the way she poured his coffee, or how she touched his shoulder when passing, or the way she looked at him across a crowded room and smiled. Caleb told her the same way. By fixing things before she asked, by taking Clara on rides so Eleanor could have quiet time, by building her a better kitchen when the old one got too small, by staying, because in the end, that's what love was. Choosing each other. Day after day,
This story
year
was
after
posted
year,
on the
good
channel
times and
west
hard
of
times and
Betrayal.
everything in
Please
between.
do not repost it
20
in any
years after
form.
Eleanor had stepped off that stagecoach in Cedar Ridge, she stood in the same spot, now dignified with an actual station platform, and watched her daughter board a train to college in Denver. Clara was brilliant and fierce and ready to take on the world. She'd inherited Eleanor's strength and Caleb's quiet determination, and she was going to do something important with her life. Eleanor could feel it. "I can't believe she's leaving," Eleanor said, watching the train disappear into the distance. "She'll be back." Caleb's arm came around her shoulders. "This is home. She knows that." "I know, but it's still hard." "Yeah, it is." Caleb pulled her close. "But we did good, Eleanor. Raised a daughter who's brave enough to chase what she wants." "We did, didn't we?" Eleanor leaned into him, this man who'd started as a stranger and become her whole world. "Think we can survive just the 2 of us again, with Michael and Grace running wild?" "We survived worse. We'll manage." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, I kind of like having you to myself sometimes. Eleanor smiled. Shameless. You love it. I love you. I know. Caleb turned her to face him, his scarred face creased with smile lines now instead of just worry. And I love you. For now and always. For now and always, Eleanor echoed. They walked back to the wagon hand in hand, partners in every sense, survivors who'd built something beautiful out of desperation and refused to let the world tear it down. The ranch waited for them, sprawling and prosperous, filled with the sounds of children and animals and life. Michael would be practicing his roping, probably. Grace would be in the kitchen, attempting another experimental recipe that would either be brilliant or inedible. Home. Real and imperfect and entirely theirs. Eleanor Rourke, who'd once been thrown away like trash, had built an empire out of nothing but determination and the love of a good man who'd seen her worth when no one else would. She'd been rejected, humiliated, left with nothing, and she'd won anyway. Not because life got easy, not because everyone apologized or justice was perfectly served, but because she'd refused to stay broken, because she'd chosen to fight, because she'd found someone who fought beside her instead of against her. That night, after the younger children were in bed and the house was quiet, Eleanor stood at the window looking out at the valley she'd come to love. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That stagecoach, the day I arrived, how certain I was that my life was over. And now? Now I know it was just beginning." She turned in his arms. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for staying when you could have run. Where would I have run to? You were the only home I had. You're the only home I need." Caleb kissed her, slow and deep, a promise renewed daily for 2 decades and counting. They stayed there, wrapped in each other, watching the stars come out over the Wyoming plains. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. The ranch would need attention. The children would need guidance. Life would continue demanding everything they had to give. But tonight, they had this. Each other. A life built on honesty instead of illusions. A family forged in fire and tempered by time. Eleanor had learned the hard way that the world was cruel, and people were flawed, and nothing was guaranteed. She'd learned that love wasn't always romance, and marriage wasn't always passion. Sometimes it was just 2 people choosing to face the world together because alone was too hard. But she'd also learned that choice mattered more than circumstance. That courage came in quiet moments as often as grand gestures. That family was made, not born. And that sometimes the best things in life came from the worst moments, if you were brave enough to see them through. Claire would come home for Christmas, bringing stories of city life and new ideas. Michael would grow into a fine rancher, steady and reliable like his father. Grace would surprise them all by becoming a teacher, bringing education to ranch children across the territory. The ranch would continue to grow, becoming one of the most successful operations in Wyoming. Eleanor and Caleb would grow old together, their hair turning gray, but their partnership never weakening. And decades from now, when people told the story of Eleanor Rourke, the woman who'd been rejected by a whole town and went on to build an empire, they'd say she was extraordinary. But Eleanor knew the truth. She wasn't extraordinary. She was just a woman who'd refused to accept the ending other people had written for her, who'd taken a terrible situation and transformed it through sheer stubborn will and the help of one good man who'd believed in her. She was just someone who'd survived, who'd fought, who'd chosen hope over despair, love over bitterness, building over breaking. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.